Hey everyone, and welcome back. We're doing a deep dive today um, into Nassim Taleb's Skin in the Game.
Oh, interesting.
Have you heard of it?
Yeah, I've read it.
It's a fascinating book.
It's a fascinating book. It's dense,
It is.
but it's good.
It's a really, really good one.
Hmm.
You might be thinking, what does an ancient Babylonian king have to do with a slice of cheesecake?
Right,
And what does that have to do with making better decisions in the 21st century?
right.
Well, Taleb connects those things.
He does.
And it's really going to change how you see the world.
Hmm.
I think so anyway. What do you think was so fascinating about the book?
Well, I think one of the things that's so interesting about Taleb's work is that he takes this idea that having something to lose fundamentally changes how we act as humans, and then he applies it to everything, from ancient legal systems to modern financial markets
Yeah, it's true.
and everything in between.
It all starts with Hammurabi's code.
Yeah.
You know, that ancient set of laws, like carved in stone,
Sure. Yeah.
way back when.
A long time ago.
Yeah. So tell me about that.
Well, I mean, the thing about Hammurabi's code that's so interesting is that it's not just about punishment. Hammurabi understood that for a system to work, both parties in any interaction need to have skin in the game, right?
Yeah.
So, like, if a builder constructed a house and the house collapsed and killed the owner of the house, the builder was put to death.
Oh, wow.
So it wasn't just about punishing a bad builder. It was about making sure that everybody had an incentive to do things right.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's sort of the origin of the idea.
Okay, but how does that apply to us today?
Well, think about the 2008 financial crisis, right? So you had all these executives at these big banks who were making very risky bets. And those bets paid off handsomely when things were good. But when those bets went sour, who bailed them out?
The taxpayers.
The taxpayers, right? People like you and me.
Right.
And that's what Taleb refers to as the Bob Rubin trade.
Right.
So they get the upside, we get the downside.
So they got the rewards, but we were left holding the bag.
Exactly. And that's because there's this asymmetry of risk.
Right.
Where the executives have everything to gain and very little to lose.
Yeah.
Whereas the average person ends up bearing the cost.
That doesn't seem very fair.
No, it's not fair at all. And this kind of dynamic can lead to all sorts of problems, not just in finance, but in any system where the decision makers aren't accountable for the consequences of their actions.
I see. So like the saying goes, no skin in the game, no moral compass.
You got it.
Yeah.
And Taleb argues that this lack of accountability creates what he calls a moral hazard, where people are more likely to take excessive risks because they know that someone else will foot the bill if things go wrong. Have you ever been in a situation where someone else was making decisions?
Yeah.
That could impact you negatively, but they weren't the ones who were going to suffer the consequences.
I'm sure I have.
Yeah.
I'm sure many of us have. That's a good point.
Mm-hmm.
And Taleb takes this even further and says that systems actually learn by removing parts.
That's right.
Now that sounds a little bit dark.
It might sound dark, but the idea is that you know how self-correction happens? So if you think about like a highway, right? Like bad drivers often end up in accidents.
Right.
And remove themselves from the system. Obviously, that's a very harsh example, but it's an example of how systems can improve when the people who are making bad choices are no longer around to make them.
Okay, so we've gone from ancient Babylon to modern finance to the open road. Where does he take us next?
Well, he takes us next into the world of kosher lemonade.
Kosher lemonade. I'm intrigued. How does that fit into all of this?
Well, so it's a story from the book, and it illustrates what Taleb calls the minority rule. And, imagine you unknowingly drink kosher lemonade. No big deal, right? But this seemingly insignificant event shows how a small, committed minority can influence choices for everyone.
Wait, so a few people who only drink kosher lemonade can impact what's offered to everyone?
Exactly. Think about halal meat. It's widely available, even in places where Muslims are a small minority.
Yeah, that's true.
Why? Because the cost of catering to their needs is lower than alienating them entirely. It's not about the numbers, it's about the asymmetry of the situation.
Oh, okay, so a small group can have a big impact if their preferences are strong enough. That's interesting. Have you ever encountered this in your own life? Maybe a time when a small group seemed to have an outsized influence on a decision?
I'm sure we all have, yeah. Yeah. And this brings us to another fascinating concept from the book, the green lumber fallacy. This is the idea that just because someone looks like they know what they're doing doesn't mean they actually do.
Oh, so we shouldn't be fooled by appearances. Like, don't judge a book by its cover, or a financial expert by their fancy suit.
Right. Taleb tells the story about this trader who made a fortune in the lumber market, but didn't even know what green lumber was. He was successful because he understood the dynamics of the market, not the intricacies of lumber itself.
Oh, so what's the lesson here? Should we be suspicious of anyone who dresses well?
Not necessarily. It's more about looking beyond the superficial,
Right.
focusing on track records, not just appearances. Don't be swayed by smooth talkers. Look at what people do, not just what they say.
This is really making me rethink how I evaluate expertise. What else does Taleb have to say about appearances and reality?
Well, he has some interesting thoughts about the rich and their susceptibility to, let's call it, sophisticated nonsense.
Okay.
He recounts a story about having dinner at a Michelin-starred restaurant
Uh,
where he was served this series of tiny, pretentious dishes.
but isn't fancy food supposed to be good? What was his problem with it?
Well, his point is that the rich are often sold things they don't actually need or want. Their preferences become constructed by others. Sometimes simplicity is better than overblown complexity.
So he'd rather have a delicious pizza than a tiny, overpriced work of art on a plate.
Exactly. Sometimes sophistication can actually detract from enjoyment. Have you ever felt pressured to buy something just because it was considered, fancy or sophisticated, even if you didn't really want or need it?
Hmm. That's a great question to think about. Okay, so we've talked about ancient laws, modern markets, and even fancy food. Now, Taleb takes us to the 11th century and the world of the assassins. This should be interesting.
Now, I'm not talking about the video game here. I'm
Well,
talking about an actual historical group, a secret society,
Mhm.
and they were masters of psychological warfare. They really understood the power of nonverbal threats. Imagine waking up to find a horse's head in your bed.
Whoa. Okay, that's a pretty strong message. But Taleb's not advocating violence, is he?
Absolutely not. But he argues that even today, simple acts like taking someone's picture can be a form of accountability. The uncertainty of what you might do with that photo can be enough to deter bad behavior.
Oh, that's fascinating. It makes you wonder how the internet has changed the game. Has it become easier or harder for people to get away with bad behavior in this digital age?
That's a great question. We have more ways to expose wrongdoing, but also more ways to hide it.
Mm.
It's a really complex issue, and one that Taleb explores in depth. But one thing is clear. Whether it's fear of punishment, or damage to reputation, or simply the desire to do the right thing, skin in the game plays a really powerful role in shaping human behavior.
Okay. So we've covered a lot of ground here, but I feel like we've just scratched the surface. I feel like we've just scratched the surface, like we've gone on this whirlwind tour
Yeah.
through history and human behavior.
Yeah.
There's one thing I keep coming back to, though. You mentioned that systems learn by removing parts, like bad drivers.
Right.
But not all mistakes are that dramatic.
Sure.
What about in areas where the consequences are less immediate or obvious?
Yeah, that's where things get a little bit more nuanced. Think about reputation. Reputation is a form of skin in the game.
Yeah.
Even if there aren't legal or financial penalties for a bad decision, damaging your reputation can have serious consequences.
So even in situations where we might not lose money or face legal trouble, there's still a cost to being wrong.
Absolutely. And that cost can be significant, especially in a world where information travels so quickly.
Yeah, that's true.
Our reputations are always on the line.
I hadn't really thought about it that way before. It's like we're all constantly being evaluated whether we realize it or not.
Exactly. And that brings us to another important concept from the book. The idea that skin in the game isn't just about external consequences, it's also about internal consequences. What Taleb calls soul in the game.
Soul in the game. Okay, what's the difference between that and just having skin in the game?
Well, soul in the game is about having this deep personal commitment to your values. It's not just about calculating risks and rewards. It's about being willing to sacrifice for something you believe in.
Oh, so it's like the difference between someone who follows the rules out of fear of punishment and someone who does the right thing because it's the right thing to do.
Exactly. Think about whistleblowers.
Hmm.
They often risk their careers and reputations to expose wrongdoing, even when they have nothing to gain personally. They're driven by a sense of justice and a belief that some things are worth fighting for regardless of the personal cost.
That's a powerful example.
Yeah,
Takes a lot of courage to do what they do.
it does. And speaking of courage, Taleb has some interesting thoughts on how courage relates to a healthy dose of what he calls selective paranoia.
Okay, how can paranoia be a good thing? Isn't that usually considered a negative trait?
Well, it can be, but Taleb argues that a certain degree of skepticism, especially towards those in positions of power, can actually be quite beneficial. He's not talking about irrational fear or conspiracy theories. He's talking about, a reasoned approach to evaluating claims and information, particularly from people who don't have skin in the game.
Oh, so it's kind of like that saying, trust but verify.
Precisely. Yeah. It's about being discerning, not blindly accepting everything we're told, especially when those doing the telling have nothing to lose if they're wrong.
Right. That makes sense. It's about thinking critically, not
Mhm.
taking things at face value.
Exactly. And it applies to so many areas of life, whether you're evaluating a financial advisor, a doctor, even a news article. Always ask yourself, do they have skin in the game? What do they have to lose if they're wrong?
Hmm. That's a great question to keep in mind.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've covered skin in the game, soul in the game, even a little bit of healthy paranoia. Is there anything else that we should be taking away from Taleb's work?
Well, he introduces this concept called the Lindy effect, which is a fascinating way to kind of evaluate the staying power of ideas or technologies or even institutions.
Okay, I'm all ears. What's the Lindy effect?
So the Lindy effect is the idea that the longer something has survived, the longer it's likely to continue surviving. So something that's been around for centuries is more likely to last another century than something that was just invented yesterday.
Yeah. So it's like a survival of the fittest for ideas and institutions.
Exactly. Think about classical literature or traditional wisdom. These things have endured for generations because they contain these valuable insights that continue to resonate with people. And the Lindy effect suggests that they're likely to be relevant for generations to come.
Hmm. That's a really interesting way to look at things. It makes you appreciate the value of timeless principles and enduring wisdom.
It does. And it can help you navigate a world that's constantly bombarded with new ideas and trends. Not everything that's new is good, and not everything that's old is outdated. The Lindy effect can help you kind of filter through the noise and focus on what truly matters.
Okay, so as we wrap up our deep dive into skin in the game, what are some key takeaways that you would want our listeners to remember?
Well, first, remember that skin in the game is this powerful concept that applies to almost every aspect of life. Recognizing where it exists or where it's missing can give you valuable insights into people's motivations and behaviors.
That's a great point. It's like a hidden lens through which we can better understand the world.
Exactly. Second, always be wary of situations where someone else benefits from your risk without bearing any of the downside themselves. This asymmetry of risk can lead to unfair outcomes and bad decisions.
So true. Like that old saying, heads I win, tails you lose.
Exactly. And finally, focus on what people do, not just what they say. Actions speak louder than words, and they're a much more reliable indicator of someone's true character and intentions.
That's a powerful reminder, and one that we should all apply to ourselves as well. Are our actions aligned with our values? Are we walking the talk?
Those are great questions to ask. And to leave our listeners with a final thought from Taleb, if you do not take risks for your opinion, you are nothing.
Wow, that's a powerful statement. What does that mean to you? What are you willing to put skin in the game for?
I'll leave that for our listeners to ponder.
That's it for this deep dive into skin in the game. We hope you've enjoyed this journey and that it's given you some new insights to apply to your own life. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep pushing yourself to have skin in the game.
Thank you for joining us at Wisdom House, where we bring you timeless insights from the greatest books. If you found this deep dive valuable, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Wisdom House. Stay curious, stay inspired, and we'll see you in the next video.